So we just got the new trailer for the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, and I figured this would be a good time to start my review series of all of the Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, slowly leading up to the movie. Now, the funny thing is, when I did my trailer reaction for the Mandalorian and Grogu trailer, I said that I thought the Mandalorian was like the least controversial thing that Star Wars had put out in the last 10 years, and then it turned out that trailer was very controversial. Look, I will stand by what I said. I liked the trailer. I liked what I saw. I think it's a good teaser to tease what is to come in 9 months' time when the movie finally releases. It's an extremely early teaser. They don't want to show too much just yet, so they are not going to show a lot from the movie. Just a couple of cool things where it's like, okay, we're back into the vibe of The Mandalorian, and we're going to have that movie. People seem to be extremely critical of everything. I will say it's still a little bit weird to see another Razor Crest instead of the N1, but other than that, we'll see. We're still 9 months out from this movie, so yeah, you know what? I'm just going to focus on The Mandalorian, the show. So today I'm starting all the way at the beginning with Season 1, Episode 1, Chapter 1, The Mandalorian 1. Now, to say that I was excited for this show at the time when it came out is an understatement. I was very hyped. I think everyone was, because it was a first live-action TV show for Star Wars. It was going to be made by two people that we know and love in the Star Wars community, called Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. Yeah, the trailers look good. And then we saw the first episode, and at the time, I really liked this first episode. I didn't have much criticisms, but now 6 years later, well, that might have changed a little bit. So now 6 years later, I'm going to dive back into it by doing a review of The Mandalorian, Episode 1, The Mandalorian. So this first episode opens with just the sound of the tracking fob, and then a lot of just visual storytelling. There's not a lot of dialogue going on because mainly the Mandalorian himself doesn't talk all that much. And, well, this opening scene, we know it. Mandalorian walks into a bar. I'm not making a joke, by the way. This is simply him walking into a bar, looking for his bounty. Initially, you assume it's one of the ruffians who's after Mithril, but then it turns out to be Mithril. I like the fact that Mithril is actually his target, because also it brings back Mithril in future episodes, and I think he's a fun character to have around as a bit of levity, so that was cool. I also just like the fact that this is a lot of visual storytelling. That is definitely one thing that the show does fairly well, not having too much dialogue to explain things and just be visual about it. It does make me wonder why the hell we have an episode with Jack Black and Lizzo where they talk a lot. But anyway, we see the Mandalorian on this cold planet, and all throughout the show, already in this episode, he goes through different locations. And I remembered, right, this was the first show to use the volume. If you don't know what the volume is, it is this giant screen that they use to create the environment around the characters, so that the actors only have to get into costume and show up on set. They don't have to go to a location like what Andor did. Now, sure, is Andor far superior with the locations? Sure. But I do think the use of the volume was a very creative and clever way to make sure that you can shoot in a studio, but it is not all green screen. You actually do have the locations around you, and you just need to use a little bit of visual trickery. But at least you have an environment for the actors to be in. And that is very important. And also in the case of the Mandalorian, his armor is shiny, so his armor will essentially reflect the environment off. And that's why you need to make sure that whatever is surrounding him is also being reflected on his armor. So it was a clever trick, honestly, to make it work. There are times that you can kind of see it, but overall, I think it looks fairly good throughout the entire show. I will say, though, one little thing that bugs me a little bit is the fact that until the name reveal of the Mandalorian in the final episode of Season 1, they're just calling him Mandalorian or Mando. Also, Mithril is the species name, and they call him Mithril. They don't call him by an actual character name. And I do think that's a bit of a lazy writing thing where it's like, can you just come up with a Star Warsy name? You should be creative enough to figure something out, I feel. And exactly because of this, by the way, I am going to call the Mandalorian Din. It is easier to say for me, and it's his actual name. Now, the opening scene is supposed to make Din look like this badass fighter, like he has everything under control when he goes on his bounties. The funny thing is, though, this is one of the few scenes where he actually has everything under control the way that he does. A lot of the other scenes throughout the show, and not just this show, also Book of Boba Fett, he gets his ass handed to him, and he has no idea what he's doing. So, in a sense, it's like, yes, it's a cool setup for the character, but there are also times that he's really out of his depth. But I suppose they do that to make the character relatable and, go through conflict, not just be badass all the time. But I'll get more into all of that later. First of all, I need to just address Ludwig Göransson's score, because oh my god, is this an instantly iconic score. Despite the fact that it's so different from our regular Star Wars scores where we're used to, because up until The Mandalorian, this might be a little bit difficult to understand now, all these years later, that we're actually quite used to the Mandalorian score. But at the time, it was a very new thing, because we had only had John Williams for the movies, and Kevin Kiner and Michael Giacchino. They always try to emulate what John Williams did. They always try to make that John Williams type score from all the other movies work in whatever they scored. So Kevin Kiner did that for the Clone Wars and Rebels. Michael Giacchino for Rogue One, of course, and then John Powell for Solo was essentially forced to do the same thing. John Powell made a score mostly with pre-existing themes, and actually I think that the themes that John Powell made for the movie itself by himself without really having to use the old scores were pretty decent, because he also made something similar to John Williams, but still his own thing. But anyway, I digress a bit. Ludwig Göransson's score is amazing. It is quite different from your regular Star Wars score, but I do think it actually set a new precedent in terms of what Star Wars scores can be. But to this day, I can hum the entire Mandalorian score. I'm not going to do that. I could totally do that, but I'm not going to do that. But I do think it's a really good, iconic score. And now, for example, when we saw the trailer, I could instantly recognize the score and hum it along as I was watching the trailer, so that was cool. Anyway, so Din wants to get back to his ship then, and he then meets with an Imperial spy at the edge of the ice. Now, I don't really understand why we have the Imperial spy here. By the way, I'm not kidding. This is literally the character's name in the Lego game, Imperial Spy. He talks and looks exactly the same way as we saw in the original Star Wars when he rats out Luke, Han, and everyone on Tatooine when the stormtroopers find them. I honestly feel that there are times in The Mandalorian like this that there are characters or things thrown in for the sake of fan service, where it's like, oh, it's the thing from the thing, you recognize it, that's cool, right? And I'm just like, okay, it's not cool if it doesn't make any sense. So in this case, I don't really think it makes much sense. I'm not a fan of the fact that they did it, and I would rather them not do this type of stuff. But anyway, the point about the scene is that Din has an aversion to droids, because the first speeder that pulls up has a droid in it, and he's like, no droids. There's a thing about that, because apparently 30 years ago, this is revealed in flashbacks throughout the first season. I assume you've seen it, because I'm talking about this episode as I have seen the entire show, of course. So, point is that Din, when he was a kid, was attacked by droids. That's how he lost his parents. And then he became a Mandalorian because the Mandalorian saved him. So for the course of, 30 years, maybe even more than that, he has been against droids. However, then in the span of this season, he learns to get along with IG-11 towards the end. Now, is that a little bit quick, considering that this first season takes place over a couple of weeks or so, maybe months. But then, yeah, okay, so the previous 30 years, he's never encountered anything to make him be more okay with droids. But now, all of a sudden, this season, something happens, and he's like, no, I'm okay with droids now. Is it a little quick? Maybe. I do think overall, the way that it's presented in the first season is good. We'll get to that later, by the way. But yeah, it's something to think about, especially because, I'm re-watching it. So then we get introduced to the Razor Crest, and a lot of people seem to really like the ship as well as the Falcon. To me, it very much reminds me of the Falcon, where I see it and I'm like, wow, that does look like a piece of junk. Because in all honesty, I've never been the biggest fan of the Falcon. Like, of course, it has an iconic look, and I do think actually the Razor Crest has an iconic look that we now recognize, but I personally have never been a particularly huge fan of either one of them. That's why I actually don't have either UCS set in my Lego collection. Sue me, I know. There are other UCS sets that I'm way more fond of that I would rather get. But anyway, on the Razor Crest, Mithril needs to take a dump. And as he is faking really taking a dump because he doesn't really need to go, he mentions Life Day. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is the first canonical mention of Life Day in something like live action. And I was like, oh my god, we're not addressing the holiday special, right? Because even George Lucas hated that thing. No. They made a new holiday special, which I actually thought was kind of cute in Lego form. As a Lego fan myself, I was a fan of that. So I thought it was cute, but it's funny that Life Day has now actually become a thing in canon of Star Wars. But as Mithril is, fake taking a dump, he's really looking for a way out, looking around the ship, and then, Din is very much onto Mithril, so then he just freezes him in carbonite. Now, this freezing in carbonite thing seems extremely convenient. Why would you have this on your ship if in The Empire Strikes Back it was like a huge thing in a facility? This actually is something that also is in the Clone Wars, and I'm also in the Clone Wars like, why is it so easy to just carbon freeze people? Because in The Empire Strikes Back, they make it out to be like a more difficult thing. They have this entire facility, and they say, oh, he might die. Well, we'll test it on Captain Solo first to see if it actually works. So if you have a giant facility, that seems a lot more stable than this just random ass ship where you can just push someone in. It's like, no, he's frozen in carbonite now. I'm like, did technology in carbon freezing really evolve that much since The Empire Strikes Back? I don't think so. But, oh my god, they did the thing from the thing. It's so cool. Anyway, Din then gets to Navarro, and he meets with Greef Karga, played by Carl Weathers, and I just have to say, rest in peace, Carl Weathers. It sucks that he passed away a little bit too early. Now, the weird thing about it is that Carl Weathers was already quite old. If you look at the age, it's like, oh, it makes sense that you would die. I just feel we just saw him in The Mandalorian just a couple of years ago, still being quite active, and I feel that he passed a little bit too soon because I would have loved to see him play the character of Greef in the movie, So that sucks. It's a big loss for the movie world in general because Carl Weathers has played iconic characters in general, and we really love. Greef Karga was his last one, I suppose. I don't really know if he's done anything else as of late, but yeah, Greef Karga, he was a great character. I really enjoy him. I really enjoy Carl Weathers in the role, and also I was at least glad that besides acting as Greef Karga, he was also able to direct an episode in season 2. I'll get into that when I get to it. But yeah, rest in peace, Carl Weathers. You're great as Greef Karga. I really enjoy your character. So then Din and Greef talk about a bounty. That is, of course, the bounty that will change Din's life because it is towards Grogu. Of course, we'll get to that entire bit later. But Din sets off on his journey, and he's walking through the city. And as he's walking through the city right now, and a little bit later as well, there are some wonky puppeteering things going on. On the one hand, I'm very glad that they decided to go with puppets and puppeteering rather than CGI. Of course, a lot of Star Wars things these days do CGI, and when you do CGI, you need to be very careful to make sure that it's not going to look dated in 10 years. So in that regard, they did take a page out of the "Don't do the prequels" book, because the prequels, say what you will about them, but I can very much see the CGI now, over 20 years later, in all three movies. So I'm very glad that they did practical effects, but some of the practical effects are wonky as all hell. One of the most notable ones is the greeting droid when Din gets to the door of the client. The greeting droid is just like bobbing around in a very static motion, and he's saying again the exact same lines from Return of the Jedi. I'm like, you couldn't have given him any other lines, or a different voice for that matter, or did you just rinse repeat the lines from Return of the Jedi? You copy pasted them in here. I feel that's lazy. So I do think they could have done a bit of a better job in that regard, especially considering that puppeteering in Star Wars has always been very good, especially with Yoda, and especially as recent as The Last Jedi in 2017. Only 2 years before this, we had Yoda in The Last Jedi. That was a puppet, and I thought that was great. So I'm like, you did that. Why can't you do it here? That's a little bit weird to me. I mean, oh my god, it's a thing from the thing. It's so cool. What is really cool, though, is when Din goes in, he meets with legendary filmmaker Werner Herzog. Also, a couple of stormtroopers and Dr. Pershing. Pershing is going to be more important later on in the series. But what I really find the standout in the scene is Werner Herzog, because apparently Werner Herzog had never seen any Star Wars before this. This was like one of the few acting roles that he did in his life, and I think he works perfectly in this role. He is like a menacing Imperial that I'm like, okay, he really plays the part well, which is funny because he is known for directing movies, not necessarily acting in them. But it was really cool to see him in this show. So Din gets a piece of Beskar and he takes it to his tribe. We actually see his tribe of Mandalorians, most notably the Armorer. Very cool character. I'm gonna get into that a little bit later, because I was actually surprised to rewatch this episode and not have her be "This is the way" and not have all the other Mandalorians there repeated. By the way, if you've gotten to this point in the episode, I've said "This is the way," so you now need to go into the comment section and say "This is the way" as well.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
Then Din is on his way, and on the next planet, he's attacked by some blurgs, and he meets Quill. Now, I already said the puppeteering is wonky as all hell, but I do like the character of Quill. I think the voice acting by Nick Nolte is pretty good on him, and overall, Quill is a good character. I really like the fact that he takes to the blurgs so much, because the blurgs was also something that I'm like, wow, we're actually seeing this in live action, because we've only seen them in the Clone Wars and Rebels, and all of a sudden they're here in live action. So like, that was cool. I enjoyed that, and that was actually a bit of fan service where I'm like, this kind of makes sense in my mind. This is not just fan service for the sake of it, like some of the other stuff that we saw. So after Din gets a lesson in how to ride a blurg, he is off to his destination, and there he meets IG-11, voiced by Taika Waititi. Now, that's another, okay, I won't say legendary filmmaker, but at least a good filmmaker from the past couple of years, even though ever since he won his Oscar, he might have dropped off a little bit. But it was still funny, because I do think Taika has a good voice to voice IG-11. IG-11 is a funny character in terms of like the self-destruct and everything. So that was cool. And I also like the fact that they brought IG-11 back in several different capacities throughout the show. Because in this capacity, of course, he is the killer bounty hunting droid. And then he gets reprogrammed by Quill, and then he gets shut down entirely later, that kind of stuff. So I do think it's a fun character that comes back throughout the show. And when you watch this episode initially and Din just shoots him in the head, you're like, oh wait, is that it? No, he's gonna come back, don't worry about it. But after they have a big shootout, they open the door, and that's where Din finally meets
Merchandising! I
mean Baby Yoda, I mean Grogu. Look, Probably the biggest thing from the show, even bigger than the Mandalorian himself, is Grogu, formerly known as Baby Yoda. I think still to this day, a lot of people just call him Baby Yoda because Grogu is a weird name and they didn't really get used to it, or they didn't get to that point, and everyone was so used to just calling him Baby Yoda because it actually took a season and a half for that name to be revealed in the episode The Jedi. So, yeah, Grogu, of course, is... I mean, how can you not? Look at him. Look at him. He's just so cute. Like, it's the cutest goddamn thing that Star Wars has done, at least in a very long time. Like, you can say R2 is very cute, or BB-8 is very cute, or the Ewoks are very cute, but come on, it has to be Grogu. Grogu is just, yeah. But Grogu also becomes a way more interesting character, as we know. Of course, I'll get into that later. But yeah, this little introduction right here at the very end between Din and Grogu is huge because it sets up the entire show. And I'm very glad that they gave us this little moment at the end of the episode. They didn't have to do that. They could have just ended the episode before they met and just leave that for the next episode. But at least they showed us that little bit because this is a show right here. Them meeting is the show and is going to dictate everything that Din and Grogu are going to go through in the next couple of years together. Because right now, we literally have the movie coming out, The Mandalorian and Grogu. But anyway, that is the first episode of The Mandalorian. Is it as good as the first time I watched it? No. Is it still good? Yes. I might have some issues, mostly in terms of the puppeteering, some of the contrivances, but it very much is Star Wars. Heck, it is so Star Wars. It has fan service up the wazoo, left, right, and center all the time that you will be reminded that you're watching Star Wars. But it's proper, clean Star Wars as we kind of deserved at the time. Because at the time, a lot of people felt a disconnect with the sequel trilogy. As much as I enjoyed what the sequel trilogy was doing for the first two movies, when it got to The Rise of Skywalker, I also was annoyed with that movie. And I'm like, at least The Mandalorian fundamentally knew what Star Wars is and should be. Simple, clean Star Wars. It's nothing groundbreaking, it's just good, it's enjoyable. So that's why I personally still really enjoy watching The Mandalorian TV show, even though it might not be as good. And of course, I'll get more into the next couple of episodes, but this first episode is enjoyable. I liked it. Now I just wonder, what do you think of it? What are your thoughts on this first episode of The Mandalorian? Please let me know in the comments below. Please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed my review and subscribe to my channel for more Star Wars content. I will continue my review series, of course. If you missed it, you can see in the background over there, I made a giant Lego Jeddah city not too long ago. If you're interested to see that project come together, it's on my channel. I'll link it in the description. I'll link it in the end of the video if you want to check that out. That's about all I can say. So come back for my next review next week for the second episode of The Mandalorian. And until then, may the Force be with you.